I'm kind of learning this stuff as I go along, so I have to check in with things like Wikipedia. Problem with Wikipedia is this is the consensus reality that they want everyone to believe, and they want everyone to turn to Wikipedia whenever they don't know something and to take it as fact that this is accurate and reflective of reality, when that is provably not the case, and Wikipedia is a mediocre resource at best. But it's a good jumping off point. It's great to go here to find out what are we supposed to think about a given topic. And so I did that with socialism, because this book that we're going into, the title is Fabian Freeway, The High Road to Socialism in the USA. So I went onto Wikipedia and I started reading. So what is socialism? Well, it's characterized by social ownership of the means of production as opposed to private ownership. And it's this question of, well, does an individual own something, or does it belong to everybody in the community? Social ownership can take various forms, including public, community, collective, cooperative, or employee. Traditionally, socialism is on the left wing of the political spectrum. Socialist politics have been internationalist and nationalist, organized through political parties and opposed to party politics, at times overlapping with trade unions and other times independent and critical of them, and present in industrialized and developing nations. So this is kind of telling you that socialist politics are beyond a lot of dialectics themselves. It says they are internationalist and nationalist. It could be apolitical, but also political. It could be trade unions and independent of them. It could be industrialized or developing nations. So it's really a very overarching umbrella that applies and is relevant and is rolled out and used everywhere, no matter what the system, the income level, the first or third world status of the place may be. Social democracy originated within the socialist movement, supporting economic and social interventions to promote social justice. Social justice will be a phrase that's probably familiar to many of the people watching this. It's been a hot topic in recent years and is driving a wedge between different groups in society. Some people claiming that the sins of our ancestors make us liable for reparations in the current day. The tearing down of statues, for example, the rewriting of history books to make them more inclusive. Social justice is really about groupthink. What group do you belong to? And your identity is not about who you are as a person and your individual characteristics. It's about your group identity and the groups you belong to. So that's what social justice deals with. While retaining socialism as a long-term goal in the post-war period, social democracy embraced a mixed economy based on Keynesianism within a predominantly developed capitalist market economy that expands state intervention to include income redistribution, regulation, and a welfare state. So this is what is to blame or to thank, depending on how you look at it, for the idea that we collect all this money from people and then we plan who it goes to and we use that to provide services to people who need that sort of thing. And we redistribute the income according to what is right and good and proper and morally correct. Interestingly, it's based on Keynesianism. Now, if you are aware at all of Nigel Watson and his YouTube channel, he's an economics teacher, and he's spoken before about how Keynesianism is just one version of economics and it is massively flawed. But he said as an economics teacher, he was not allowed to teach competing versions of economics. He wasn't allowed to teach the Austrian economics, which is a totally different way of doing things. I don't know the ins and outs of it, but Keynesianism is kind of the default economics that you get when you go to university or you study an A-level course here in the UK and so on. And you really have to go off on your own to find the other economic systems that have been developed, which are not included in the mainstream economics education here. So I thought it was quite interesting that they've linked Keynesianism to this definition and explanation of socialism. The socialist political movement includes political philosophies that originated in the revolutionary movements of the mid to late 18th century and out of concern for the social problems that socialists associated with capitalism. So this way of thinking has capitalism in its sights. It is blaming capitalism for the problems and saying that these social problems are caused because of capitalism, and therefore we need to do something about it. And notice that it is closely tied with revolutionary movements. Socialism has come to signify anti-capitalism and advocacy for a post-capitalist system based on some form of social ownership. By the early 1920s, communism and social democracy had become the two dominant political tendencies within the international socialist movement, with socialism itself becoming the most influential secular movement of the 20th century. Now, this is really critical and very interesting because 20th century saw unbelievable suffering and death. And it's not often talked about what ideologies went into making that possible. We get told that a certain guy with a mustache got a hold of some power back in Germany and he did some damage, and that was the worst thing that happened in the 20th century. That was not the worst thing that happened in the 20th century by a long shot. There were other systems that were being rolled out and being used, which caused way, way, way more death than the mustache man did. But it's left out of the history books and not talked about. They touch on it a little bit in this article, but anyway. Many socialists also adopted the causes of other social movements such as feminism, environmentalism, and progressivism. I think we all are aware of the damage that these isms have done. I've talked a bit about these two on my Hayes Reviews Live series, which can be found on the live tab on the YouTube channel here. Progressivism is just this sort of idea that change is good and we have to keep moving forward and changing things. But certainly feminism and environmentalism, two massive cons that have done untold amounts of damage to people and continue to do so. So socialism experienced a resurgence in popularity in the 2010s, most prominently in the form of democratic socialism. So it's coming back. The etymology. The word socialism finds its root in the Latin sociare, and the related, more technical term in Roman and medieval law was societas. This latter word could mean the more legalistic idea of a consensual contract between free men. So I didn't know it had this root in a word that means contracting. Now, I'm not an expert on law, but I do know that the maritime law, which operates in most of our sort of Western countries, tends to entrap people by tricking them into establishing contracts. And I don't know a whole lot about common law versus maritime law. I know a little bit. It's a minefield, very hard to get your head around, and you need some deep, dedicated study to understand. And I shouldn't say it's a minefield just because I'm too dumb to understand it. I shouldn't put you off trying to study it and understand it. Go for it. I think more people do need to know and understand the difference between maritime contract law versus common law, law of the land, versus ecclesiastical law. That's another one as well. But I find it very tricky. But it's interesting here that socialism is rooted in this idea of contracting, of consensual contracting between free men. The initial use of socialism was claimed by Pierre Leroux, and Leroux was a follower of Henri de Saint-Simon, one of the founders of what would later be labeled utopian socialism. And, the road to hell is paved with good intentions, so anyone who's trying to bring about a utopia is probably going to cause a lot of damage along the way. Socialism contrasted with the liberal doctrine of individualism that emphasized the moral worth of the individual while stressing that people act or should act as if they are in isolation from one another. So it's setting itself apart against, so socialism is setting itself against individualism, and it's setting itself against capitalism as well. The original utopian socialists condemned this doctrine of individualism for failing to address social concerns during the Industrial Revolution, including poverty, oppression, and vast wealth inequality. So they're blaming these social ills on the fact that people are individualistic and the individual has value in society. Saint-Simon proposed economic planning, scientific administration, and the application of scientific understanding to the organization of society. So this is very much in line with the Julian Huxley, Aldous Huxley, H.G. Wells, Bertrand Russell, George Bernard Shaw type thinking that we need to remove all of the metaphysics and we just need science. Get rid of theology, get rid of spirituality, get rid of God, angels, demons, spirits. All of that stuff is bunk. Chuck it to one side and we'll just have enlightened, rational, scientific humanism. And if you remember, or if you were here for the reading of the Rockefeller book, there was 2 chapters there on humanism, and I did a whole intro explaining what humanism is. And in a word, it's relativism. It's moral relativism, and that actually comes through later in this article as well. But here you can see the original creators of the idea of socialism are advocating for this top-down scientific control of everything, so it's technocracy. And then it says here that it was not until after the Bolshevik Revolution that socialism was appropriated by Vladimir Lenin to mean a stage between capitalism and communism. That's really critical, and a lot of people don't know that. Lenin defined socialism as the midpoint, the place you go as you transform capitalism into communism. So very critical to bear that in mind. Socialism isn't something that you set up and then you stay in socialism. Socialism is the midpoint of the transformation, and you will carry on transforming until you get into communism, according to Lenin. According to the Oxford Handbook of Karl Marx, Marx used many terms to refer to a post-capitalist society. Positive humanism, right? There it is. So I told you in the Rockefeller Foundation, Fosdick wrote 2 chapters about humanism. And here we have it again, this humanism idea, which basically just comes down to humans should do whatever makes them happy, which boils down to relativism. So socialism very much linked to humanism. Marx used these terms completely interchangeably. The notion that socialism and communism are distinct historical stages is alien to his work. So there again, you have Karl Marx, who's using socialism and communism interchangeably, showing that you don't separate them. Lenin says socialism, it just comes before communism is rolled out, and in Marx's view, they're the same thing. Now, in Christian Europe, it says communists were believed to have adopted atheism. So now you've got it also setting itself up in tension with not only capitalism, not only individualism, but also against religion and God and theology and Christianity. I did highlight a bit here as well. Social and political theory. So this is really telling us a little more about the ideology itself. The fundamental objective of socialism is to attain an advanced level of material production and therefore greater productivity, efficiency, and rationality as compared to capitalism and all previous systems. Productivity, efficiency, and rationality. Notice that they're not looking for happiness, they're not looking for security, they're not looking for job satisfaction, they're not trying to improve people's fulfillment, they're not trying to improve their relationships, their ability to have children and form community. No. We need productivity, efficiency, and rationality. That's what the world needs more of. I've got that live stream nose itch that tends to happen. Speaking of noses, look at that fella. Early French socialist. Whoa, that's a whopper. Under the view that the expansion of human productive capability is the basis for the extension of freedom and equality in society. So we need to make human beings more productive, which means work them harder for longer and get more out of them. And that will give us more freedom and equality in society. Socialism holds that social mores, values, cultural traits, and economic practices are social creations. In other words, relativistic, because they're just man-made, and not the result of an immutable natural law. Socialism wants to get rid of that. Everything is just socially created. You know, it's a social construct. You hear this word, this phrase quite a lot. Gender is a social construct. But the object of their critique is man-made social systems. So this bit also stood out to me and made me laugh. So the object of the socialist critique is they're critiquing the man-made social systems because they give rise to observed social problems and efficiencies. And what's the answer to these man-made social systems? Well, another man-made social system, obviously. because the man-made social systems that we're critiquing have problems, but this man-made social system that we're advocating doesn't somehow. So work that one out. Welcome to Hayes Reviews.